Welcome to Adventure Thinking, an intimate series of live video podcasts that explores the mindset born from challenge, adversity, and living a life of no regrets. I'm Jonesy, your host, and for the past 20 years, I have been lucky to have embarked on some crazy expeditions.
And I'm Lauren, your other host, and I haven't.
And returned transformed, with some pretty epic tales to share.
I'm more of an accidental adventurer.
You just start to question why you're doing it.
Each week, I'll be bringing adventure stories
We'll be bringing
and mindsets down from the proverbial mountaintop as we dive into the hearts and minds of some of the world's greatest adventurers. These are people that have achieved truly phenomenal undertakings against all odds and have returned better for it. So, do you want to live more adventurously? This is Adventure Thinking.
Hello. All right, so it is episode 15 today of Adventure Thinking. And Lauren, how are you doing? That was a really pregnant pause. I'm really scared. I'm going to get divorced or something right now, I think. What's going on? What do you need to tell me?
No, I think it's a perfect time for this episode because, can you hear me? Today we have Tim Cope on and his theme, and we will get into who he is. If you don't know him, he's an amazing individual, but his theme is rushing slowly. So it's very appropriate because, well, Justin and I have been rushing a ton lately, and it's my pet peeve because I think that in modern day society, busyness is a badge of honor. And it's something that I have been entrapped by, but I really, really, really set up my days to not be entrapped by it. So it's very frustrating when I find us rushing around. And that's been no different. So I would say we've been rushing manically today, and that doesn't feel good. So it's probably the best time for us to be having this chat with Tim.
So we're not actually in our regular spot. We're not at home because there's some work's been done on our building, so that's not appropriate to do.
Because we're moving in a couple of weeks, which adds to the rushing.
But so we've come over to the Bat Cave, which is Mum and Dad's garage. So we've shifted the studio over here, set it up, and we're setting it up and realised that I've forgotten my Mac adapter. So Lauren had to go on a bloody drive. So she's literally just walked in about 10 minutes ago. So rush slowly. That's what we're going to do next time. But no, today is going to be a lot of fun. And I'm going to jump you out of the picture for a second here, Lauren, because we've got Tim Cope, and he's going to be talking about, this theme of rush slowly. Now, you're probably wondering who Tim Cope is, and if you don't know who he is, what's that, Lauren?
I'm still here in the picture.
She's still here in the picture. I know.
You haven't cut me out completely.
Got this creepy lady in the corner. Tim is... Well, he's just pretty amazing. I mean, in reality, he's probably one of Australia's most awarded explorers actually out there. He is one of Australia's top 50 greatest explorers of all time. I somehow snuck into that group, but Tim definitely deserves that status. But Tim has chased a life of adventure and chased, exposing himself to different environments and different cultures right around the world. Some of his big, massive expeditions, have included, in 2000, he rode a recumbent bicycle from Russia to Beijing at 10,000 kilometers. That's huge. With fellow Australian Chris Hadley. And then he followed that up with a trip down the Yenisei River, which is, I think, the fifth largest river system in the world, in Russia, in Siberia to the Arctic Ocean in 2001. And he did that trip with some pretty amazing people, Ben Kozel, Colin Angus, and Remy Quinter. So there's some people that, have got phenomenal stories. So these guys on that trip, I don't know what happened to them, but they've all gone off and done amazing things. But what Tim, I suppose, became most famous for, gained him the most notoriety, is he did this epic expedition over 3 years. 2004 to 2007, he rode on horseback from Mongolia to Hungary, which spanned 3 years and 10,000 kilometers. And that's just absolutely phenomenal. And Tim is someone I really look up to. And I am so stoked to get into this chat with him and this theme, because I think we all need it. And to get everything kicked off, let's start with a little intro video on the trail of Genghis Khan.
When I was 20 years old, my friend Chris and I were cycling across Mongolia. While struggling through the Gobi Desert one day, these amazing wild horsemen came galloping from over the horizon. They headed off to places that our bikes could never have gone. These people had a world without boundaries. From here in Mongolia stretched the great Eurasian Steppe to Hungary, and their ancestors were once warriors who crossed this vast space. It inspired in me a dream to live the life of a nomad and ride a horse from Mongolia to the Danube. I never imagined what lay before me. Long nights alone menaced by wolves and thieves, impossible mountain passes, and the most extreme climate on Earth. I'd even be caught in a war between sedentary and nomad people and face a personal tragedy that almost ended my journey. But I was driven on by an old nomad wisdom. To understand the wolf, you must put on the skin of a wolf and see through its eyes.
Tim Cope, how are you?
Hi, Tim.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on. It's good to see some people who look like you've had a bit more sun than us here in Melbourne.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, but that's just standard Melbourne, isn't it? Even if it was good weather and you had no lockdown, you still get a little bit more rain and cover than us.
Well, at least we've got an excuse.
Yeah, it's true. Have you become COVID fit or are you COVID fat at the moment, Tim? How are you feeling?
It's a bit of a combination. I think we've all become pretty good at maximising that 1 hour of exercise, which has now jumped up to 2.
Yep.
We're all creatures of habit, so I haven't actually utilised that second hour properly yet. It's in some ways the curfew's been quite a good thing. It gets you in a routine and a regime.
That's a nice way to spin it into a positive. And Tim, you've been cycling, haven't you, instead of running or anything like that? That's been your exercise, your poison of choice, hasn't it?
Well, I had been cycling, but as you probably know, I had my bike nicked. So JobKeeper doesn't quite pay for a new bike as yet. So I'm back to walking and running again.
Yeah, I was actually thinking.
That's a kick in the guts.
You dealt with horse thieves in Mongolia, and now you're dealing with bike thieves in Melbourne.
Bike thieves in lockdown Melbourne. I mean, this is an expedition you hadn't planned on being on, and here you are.
Yeah, and it has many times during this experience it has reminded me of what it is like to be on an adventure when you're in a tough spot and you need to just get through it, to have that sense of patience and composure and realise that it's not going to last forever because otherwise, it'd be tough.
How are you doing? I mean, considering in that amazing clip, and I'm so excited for you to share some stories with us today, because this adventure thinking is all about sharing kind of those stories from the mountaintop and bringing us together, even though we are physically separated or in isolation or what have you in this weird year that is 2020. But, in that video, you said you were inspired by these nomadic people and you decided to live a nomadic life. And you really sought that throughout, a majority of your life in adventures, in the unknown, in the unique. And here you are locked down in Melbourne in a house or an apartment. How has that been for you, given you had adjusted to this way different way of being?
Well, the Kazakhs have this really interesting saying, and I think there's an equivalent in the Middle East and elsewhere, that you should trust in fate or trust in God, but always tie up your camel. And I think that speaks volumes. We can interpret it in many ways, but partly to me it speaks about this really interesting challenge in life, which is to navigate a really sometimes delicate balance, a path between writing the script of your own life, being the master of your own destiny, but then also not being so brittle that you can't be open to the unexpected. And I think leaving space for the unexpected is part of the success for a lot of people. I'm sure the people you've been chatting to. It's when things don't go to plan where you get these gems in life. And so, walking that tightrope between, on one hand, being in control, but then on the other hand, allowing destiny to be a little bit of your master. That's what it's a bit like for me here in lockdown. This is one of those times where, okay, well, the journey's taking me. I don't have full control. COVID's not something I can control. There are things I can, and this journey will take me where I never expected and perhaps never wanted to be, but it is the journey that I'm on. Yeah. And so I think nomads, for whom life is like, threading the eye of a needle each and every day, they live with adversity and challenge every single day of their life in a way more difficult than anything I've been born into. I think they remind us to put our life into context, not only in terms of not sweating the small stuff, but I think more importantly, reminding us that we are but one species in a much bigger web of life. And on one hand, that's really humbling that we are just, as individually, just these tiny, if you like, insignificant beings. And in the scheme of time, I mean, our lives pass by at the speed of light, really. But on the other hand, once you, like such as nomads, once they realise that they do have a role, that role as an individual and as a human is also very powerful. So I feel like being in this moment with COVID-19 has made me reflect on all of those things. And it's that wrestle, isn't it, that we all deal with. But I think that's what also keeps life exciting. Being on the edge on the edge of unknown, and then on the edge of holding the reins of your life.
This is why I'm really excited to talk to you, Tim, because most of the people that we've talked to so far, well, not most, but a lot of the people we've talked to so far, and myself, most of my experiences, you're pitting yourself very much against the environment, and you don't have that much interaction on the trips I've done with different cultures, different places. And so you don't get that experience. I'm a little bit scared, I have to admit, of that unknown human element, and that's what you crave and you seek and you chase. I mean, you're fluent in how many different languages? I just want to highlight that because I think it's amazing. Tim?
No, I'm really only fluent in Russian and English.
English?
I'm still learning Mongolian, but language has been important for me nonetheless. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. I mean, you say that you're still learning. I hear around the traps that you're pretty darn good with your Mongolian. It's not bad. No, okay, all right. Well, I'm just fanboying right now. I'm just having a fanboy moment. I love Tim. Anyway, now that I've made it sufficiently awkward. Sorry, Lauren.
I was just going to say...
No, I wish I was fluent in Mongolian, but unfortunately I'm not. But my Russian is very good.
Okay.
And I lean on that a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say it's an interesting one. It's a very timely topic that you've chosen, Tim, rushing slowly. One, because, in modern day life, there is this element that we have to go faster and bigger and better, whether that's in business or profits or, our own trajectories in life. And there's also this badge too, that is the badge of busyness. How many times a day when I was in the corporate world, hey, how are you going? Oh, good, busy. Yeah, me too, busy. And I think unpacking this busy and rushing concept, I'm really excited about your perception on those, especially as you are locked down and probably either less busy and less confined than you normally have been, or maybe not. I know that we were talking right before we started airing, and you were saying how organized you are about all of your videos and your documentaries. And we were lamenting about how little time we've had with two small people in a small environment. So Yeah, should we jump into?
I think we should jump into it. So
Yeah.
the format of this is we ask all our guests to share a story around that theme at the very start of it. And Tim has actually curated some videos for us to watch whilst he's narrating them and telling a story.
And your photography is amazing. Like check out Tim's Instagram if you haven't already, because it transports you to another world and it's just gorgeous. So I'm so excited to see some of your videos.
When we get to the discussion part, I'll actually share some of those photos as well, because they are super cool. But Tim, would you like me to play that first video?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, why not? Let's get going.
Let's get going.
Yeah. So I might just start with this moment. This was a couple of years after I'd come up with that idea of riding horses on the trail of Genghis Khan. This man, Otchibad, and his mates hooked on and said, well, what are you going to do when the wolves attack? What happens when the thieves steal your horses? Why aren't you carrying a gun? My plan had just been to get away from those human constructs that you've been talking about, the 9 to 5, the rush, and have complete freedom to point the nose towards the setting sun. And as my friend Colin Angus mentioned, he actually said, don't worry, just keep following the setting sun until, these people start speaking French. But we all know things aren't quite as simple as that. You might want to just pause it here for a moment. I'm getting a little bit behind as usual, bringing in stories I wasn't planning to.
That's all good.
The journey actually started in not a great way, but it turned out to be a very, very valuable lesson. On just the 5th night of the journey, I went to sleep in this beautiful, great big olive green steppe, and it was this utopia I dreamed of. It was a place in my mind that had complete freedom. Where time wasn't measured in dollars and cents or by the hour. It was about the rise and fall of the sun, the seasons. And I went to sleep to the sound of these people who brought their animals back in, kids galloping around on horses. But I woke up at 3 a.m. and it was a completely different scenario. You can probably roll it again now. The earth was vibrating under me, and I could hear my horses galloping off into the night that I'd only just bought. So I leapt out of the tent, and there on the ground was this horse bell that I'd been given by an equine vet to put on the horses as a kind of alarm. But obviously they just crept up into camp, pulled the bell off, jumped on and galloped off. One of my friends had said, well, if you don't solve your problems before the sun comes up in Mongolia, you never will. I had one horse left. I galloped off, and a couple of hours later, amazingly, these horses came over, arrived. They were there, my horses, and the man nearby came up and said, well, I know they're your horses, you tie them badly. They came to me themselves. Now, that made no sense whatsoever, but it didn't matter anymore. He took me home to his family in these, you can see there, what's called a gur, or more commonly known in English as a yurt. He introduced me to his family, even slaughtered a goat, and we feasted on a little bit of fermented horse milk. And he taught me this very valuable saying that I was able to translate later on. A person on the steppe without friends is as narrow as a finger, and a person on the steppe with friends is as wide as the steppe. Now, the steppe is, of course, this 6,000 miles of open plains and deserts and mountains that stretch from Asia into Europe. This was a really big lesson for me. It could have been these guys who stole the horses. With time, I learned that horse stealing was pretty much part and parcel of life out here. We might just pause it there just for 1 second. As it turned out, there's an ancient kind of tradition that if someone falls in love with a horse and can manage to get away with it, then essentially the horse is more deserving of its new owner than it was of you. And so it's up to you. The challenge is, if you've got a horse that's worth treasuring, then, well, if someone tries to steal it, you embrace it as a compliment. My horses were stolen 4 or 5 more times in years to come. And looking back, if I'd remained offended and kind of upset every time someone tried to steal a horse from me, it would have been a miserable experience. I had to take a breath and be more curious to understand what was happening, rather than that kind of natural knee-jerk reaction of being offended and upset and not, this is not fair and all the rest of it. And that has really helped me in everything from writing my book and something else I try to bring into life at the moment. You can probably roll on now. But that's something that took a while longer to really fully understand. In those early days, what I had to do was obviously introduce myself to the people, break out of my little cultural bubble, leave my Western baggage behind, and I found that by asking them if I could
Mongolians.
if I could camp in the vicinity of their homes, they saw me as a guest and someone to look after rather than to prey upon. We can carry on now if you want.
Tim, this one's got a bit of audio. Do you want to play the audio for this part?
Yeah, you can play the audio for this one. Yeah.
Sure.
System requires 2 people most of the time. But these guys know what they're doing because they pack up their gears twice a year and off they go with all of their gears. Could be up to 50 k's away to their winter home.
So I started to learn a bit more about these nomads who, of course, pack up their homes on the back of camels, in some places yaks, and move from place to place. I'll never forget the day I took this photograph. I was hanging on to the mane of my horse for dear life, looking into this great big gorge when a lady appeared towing a whole caravan of camels down, and she revealed on one of these camels her baby. And it left me with this sense that these people live so closely with their animals. Probably move on from there if you like. They live so closely with their animals that they probably put more trust in their animals with their precious loved ones than we do sometimes as fellow human beings. And like going back to what I said before, I feel like one thing we can learn from nomads is the fact that they do constantly see themselves in the broader context, not only in terms of adversity and challenge and putting in context of what other people are going through, but the context of the bigger web of life. And these people turn a lot of our notions upside down. They only own as many possessions as they can fit on the back of a camel, but they're also really good at adapting their life to modern technology, not just sustainably to that ecology. One more thing, I guess, one more takeaway from Mongolia in those early days for me was that I could have planned this journey for another 40 years back in Australia, and I would never have been ready. I didn't have enough money. I didn't have the skills or the confidence. I had to do what any young person needs to do when they go to school and turn up to learn, and that is embrace the opportunity to take on challenge and use the passion and the health while you've got it, I think, and that health part being something else that's become more obvious to me during COVID.
Did you find that as on this journeys, was there a point where you feel like that you're a lot closer to the people that you met? They didn't view you as a foreign entity, or is there always going to be that sort of guardedness that you have to always break down with each different community, each different group? Because those photos are amazing. The fact that they're comfortable with you taking those personal images, maybe they don't think of them that way, but it's stunning how you weasel your way in, Tim. I probably shouldn't say weasel.
For me, riding a bicycle across Russia and Siberia, rowing a boat to the Arctic, they were completely, it was like chalk and cheese with this journey. And in part, that's because being on a horse inherently meant that I was breaking away from the modern world and kind of transcending modern time, which was my aim, but also turning up in a nomad's backyard on horse was extremely familiar to them.
Okay.
I mean, the nomads have been riding horses for about 6,000 years. They were the first to domesticate them. Right, coming in on a bicycle was a bit like landing on a spaceship. So there was this strange phenomenon where I was this strange person from another side of the world and yet very familiar at the same time. And they could understand my problems, what I was going through, long before often I even knew I had these issues. And talking about languages like you were at the beginning, I think the language of the horse became a really, really important part of this journey. That interaction they have with the horse connects them to their natural environment, but also their history. And all these countries, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Russia, Hungary, these steppe nations, were all tied together by that. And so the horse was my way, if you like, of honouring their way of life. And so I think that helped greatly in terms of being close to the people. But I'd have to say also that the times where I became closest to people was when I was at my most vulnerable and things went wrong. And that was when a sense of camaraderie was created that can't really be replicated in any other scenario. As you would know from doing your expedition with Kaz in Antarctica and crossing the ditch, and of course with Lauren and your child, there's a bond which is formed in the midst of adversity on an adventure that is hard to explain unless you've experienced it. And I always felt that nomads accepted me, if you like, as someone else that they could share a moment of adversity with. A bit like two little boats meeting on the ocean, and wonderful shared moments, whether it be a cup of tea or 3 days of feasting or even longer.
The bond formed through adversity, I think, is and vulnerability. I think is something that our world is seeing now a bit more. People are talking to their neighbors when they haven't, or checking on each other. Where you were talking earlier about this tenuous dance, I guess, of having a plan but then letting it go in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then also, there's a value of being vulnerable and having adversity. The value of that is having these deeper connections. Where do you see it kind of, do you know when it dips too far on either side? Do you know what I mean? Because I know that Justin and I struggled with that. Like, yes, it did bond us as a couple, but there was several times the
trauma bonding
where I was like, I think we might have pushed this a bit too far, and maybe it is detrimental. Is that a familiar feeling to you, or how do you know when you've kind of dipped too far into the unknown?
Well, yeah, it's a really good point. I often think about that, and one of the things that strikes me is that you have to always remember where you started and where your direction is. In my case, when things kind of started to go off the rails a little bit, and destiny was becoming my master a little bit too much and a bit too deep, then I had to kind of pull back a little bit of control as best I could. And I did that by reminding myself of I've got to stick to my guns. This was the ideals that I set out with. This is the core values that I hold. And I know those values and that preconception is going to be challenged, but ultimately, sometimes you've got to bring it back to the center. And there are lots of times in life when you realize that the humbling experience that none of us can be completely self-reliant beings. This idea that we can all be master of all hands is just a fallacy. And I think as soon as you open yourself up to vulnerability, you recognise that you have to seek control. You can't be good at everything, and you need to invite the knowledge that other people bring and completely different approaches to life that might grate against you. You need to bring those in. And so, I feel like it's a tough wrestle for sure. And we'll probably get a bit more into that. Probably, I'll demonstrate that just through the next couple of stories. Actually, might for those who are thinking that's a little bit abstract.
Well, just to can I just ask you said that your true north during this kind of when you've been pulled off track and you had to pull back was really your set of values. What are those for you? What are your personal set of values? Do you have them defined, or are they just more of a feeling, or what do they mean to you?
Well, for me, journeys have always been a vehicle, if you like, for getting to know myself better, getting to know cultures and people that I don't know, and also being immersed in a natural, relatively, if you like, wild environment. And I have loved writing ever since I was a kid. And I don't know what came first, my love for adventure or writing, but they're joined for me. And writing, of course, is all about digesting the experience, learning from it, sharing it with others, and kind of moving on. So, look, I think certainly my passions and interests evolve and change, and the goalposts are constantly shifting, and that can be frustrating because sometimes by the time you've got yourself ready to live out a dream, well, you've changed and the goalposts have shifted. I guess they're the values that I set every journey with. I think the most difficult thing in life is obviously human relationships. That's far more difficult than going out in the empty steppe of Mongolia or Kazakhstan. In a way, that's the easy part. You're out there in a bit of a bubble. At least I was with my horses and my dog. And you kind of, sure, you're going through a bit of difficulty with the wilds, but the real difficulty is when you come back and re-engage with human society. Because suddenly some of those preconceptions that may have kind of started to calcify in your mind when you're out there on your own, they get blown to smithereens when you arrive in someone else's reality, and you think, oh, this person thinks completely differently about that. And then forming relationships with people that are different to us is the most difficult thing, and yet that's the most important thing. So it is that wrestle, that dance, whatever you want to call it, and so many different things in life, between taking a leaf out of other people's book, but then also coming back to, still remaining true to yourself, but not sticking to your insular ways so that you limit yourself and limit your growth. So it's a tricky one. But I agree totally with what you said, Lauren, that there is certainly such a thing as too much challenge and too much stress. And once you go too far and you push yourself too far, in some occasions that can be very counterproductive. And I've got a brother who's suffering from an unknown illness, closely resembles chronic fatigue, and so I've observed through him that it's an extremely it's like a very exacerbated example of what we all deal with, but a little bit too much stress, and it's counterproductive. But you still need to find ways to challenge yourself in order to move on and grow and improve yourself and help yourself. So, yeah.
It's pulling in that balance. Well, you mentioned your dog briefly in there, and you've also, which when I met you, I think at the 50 Greatest Explorers the first time, or heard about kind of your journey in more depth, Tigan and Tim were together, and Tigan is your dog that you took or you met out in this wild place, because you met Tigan in Mongolia, didn't you? Tigan is Mongolian.
He's Kazakh.
Kazakh.
But Kazakhs and Mongolians, from my point of view, they're in the brotherhood of nomadic cultures, so closely linked.
Can you tell us how you met Tigan? Is that coming up on? Are we getting there?
If we could roll the video, we can keep chatting, and that'll hopefully
definitely
be in the background.
So I'll jump into that, and there's a bit of audio, I think.
Yeah, actually, we'll just watch this a little bit first. This was my
There's 2 meters of snow up here in eastern Kazakhstan in winter. If I don't move, I'm going to be stuck here till March. But it's just bloody hard. The fingers just get totally frozen tying up the saddles, and The tent's just covered in rime and frost. It's just cold. It's like the earth's just been entombed in ice.
So Tim, this part's silent, I think.
Yeah, so this was what I didn't know, of course, was going to be the coldest winter in 40 years, but I was lucky to be introduced to this man you've just seen, Asset, and he guided me for the first couple of weeks. You can keep rolling, actually. And he said to me, Tim, you need a friend on the road, someone to keep you warm at night.
Oh.
So he gave me Tigan, who was this tiny little runt living onto my shoulder just to get his paws out of the cold. And I thought he was not going to survive more than a couple of weeks, but Asset looked back at me and said, in our country, dogs choose their humans.
Tigan, come on. Come on, mate. Hey, no. Tigan, no, wait.
So Tigan was, in hindsight, thinking, thank God Tim's protecting me from the wolves as we went to sleep at night. But I couldn't have lived without him, even within a couple of days of heading off. And it wasn't just that sense of camaraderie that softened the edges of that experience. It was this sense of humour that he brought. You keep playing if you like, Justin.
I think that's the end of that video.
Oh, that's the end of it. Sorry. Yeah, it is too. And there were many funny times. I remember the way that he used to play tug of war with an oatmeal biscuit that I'd throw on the ground, and he'd kind of play his tug of war with my horse. But also in the winter, I'd put him inside a great big sports bag and then zip him up. He'd curl up into a ball and stay warm. And then later on, I would get the tent set up. I'd cook dinner. And as the smells wafted about, this bag had come back to life and started hopping towards the petrol stove. And I'd dangle a little bit of pig fat into his jaws, and I'd open the zipper fraction. So yeah, he going to sleep at night and feeling his presence in the tent, waking up and hearing him bark in his dreams and seeing his paws a twitch, it brought a softness to the journey and a reassurance, and allowed me to sleep, which was really important at that stage. I'd been having a really bad time trying to get sleep because of the threat of thieves, but also I'd had a couple of encounters with wolves.
I mean, maybe that's, you had said, that fine line between going outside of your comfort zone and pushing it too far or pushing the stress too far. Maybe there's something in, I love how you just said the camaraderie of Tigan choosing you was softening the edges of your experience, and finding those soft bits and the hard bits is what allows us to probably push, beyond something that we either want to or thought we were capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like building in those little rewards for yourself is so important, and resilience isn't something that you can create overnight or buy off the shelf. It's something that is built over many years, and it's something that you need to constantly work at. And for me, Tigan was a crucial part of the journey, in part because I could see a lot of me in him. Here we were, both of us having our first winter ever in Kazakhstan, going through so many firsts together, and his rite of passage often mirrored my own. And I kind of noticed through him, in hindsight, the way that because he expected the best of human beings, they miraculously offered it to him in return. His positivity was infectious, and there were so many things about him that I learned from deeply. So I was very fortunate that I met Asset. And once again, Asset, honestly, I was very close to leaving Tigan behind. I just saw him as a liability to begin with, and had no idea how we'd cope, how I'd get him out of the country. But Asset had some foresight that I didn't have, and I'm super glad that that wasn't one of those moments when I was just really stubborn and decided to go walk my own way because it changed my life.
Look, Tim, we're both dog people, so absolutely get that bond that you have with an animal. Haven't done anything like
not wild
like a
dog
journey
people.
like that with Ollie, our hypoallergenic labradoodle, emotional support dog. But I know a lot of horse people as well, and they find they have that same bond with their horses. Now was it because of that? I suppose the fact that you and Tigan were going through things together that you didn't have that same connection with your horses, or did you? I mean, because you've got this menagerie of animals sort of traveling across the steppe with you.
It's interesting you mention it, and that's the reason that I'm not talking as much about the horses is simply a product of the fact that most people find it very difficult to relate to horses unless you've had a close relationship with them. Whilst dogs seem to be something universally that can cut straight through. I had a very close relationship with my horses. I went from being someone at the start who couldn't ride a horse to at the end seeing these horses as not only part of the family but almost as an extension of my own nervous system. You become so closely intertwined, and there was something extraordinarily calming and soothing about going out at night. The routine in the winter in Kazakhstan was I usually carry 50 kilos of whatever grain I could get, whether it be wheat or corn or barley. And I'd go out there in the dark and I would kind of rub them down. I'd check for any hot spots from under the saddle, and I'd give them 3 kilos of grain each. And it was this beautiful moment where stars were out, the horses were in a kind of deep state of relaxation usually by that stage. And horses are an extremely emotional animal. They're emotional geniuses. They can read a human in a split second. And horses are a little bit like children. I'm assuming, not that I have children yet. But
apparently smarter than children. Apparently the horses
can read you like a book, and you cannot pull anything. You can't hide anything from them.
Yep.
And so remaining composed was very important for them, and they have a long memory, horses as well. So a great night on this journey was going to sleep at night, listening to the horses munch through grass, knowing that I'd done my job. A bad night was going to sleep in the tent to silence because there wasn't a stick of grass for them to eat. And so in many ways this journey became about finding grass, and I obsessed about it, and grass became tied me to the landscape in a way that other modes of travel definitely wouldn't have.
It's interesting you mentioned that about horses, because I'm not naturally a horse person. I didn't grow up around them, whereas Lauren did when she was younger. And so I'm scared of horses, and I'll approach them, but they can sense that, they can read that on me straight away. And Lauren's straight up there, and she's just hands on and can do stuff with them that gets me a bit freaked out. But I suppose that's why they use them for equine therapy, don't they? Because they can read it.
Absolutely.
I mean, you've done that, haven't you, Lauren?
Yeah, I had this amazing experience with this horse, and I've only done it once, and I'd like to explore it a bit more. But we went out, and he basically, I think I was feeling very ungrounded at this time in my life, and was really struggling. It was after we got back from the outback, and we were thinking about having another baby, and kind of, I think it was the point that, Tim, you were saying, you get back from these big expeditions and you've changed. And now you're trying to reintegrate into your world, but you feel different. So I too explored writing. So writing was something I loved as a child, but it was something that wasn't useful in the business world beyond dot points. So I got back into blogging and writing, and it really lit a spark in me. And I remember writing, like, it felt like a jumper or a sweater that used to be my favorite sweater, and I'd always feel comfortable on. When I put it on after an expedition, it was too tight and a bit scratchy, and it felt uncomfortable. So I was feeling very ungrounded. And my friend was like, let's go do some equine therapy. And we went, And this horse, they choose you. So you just kind of sit there, and he came up, and he was apparently quite a powerful healer. But really just sniffed me, came around, and then just stood over me from my back and put his head over. And I just felt this surge of energy grounding down my back. And it actually, for the first time, allowed me to release some anxiety I was carrying and just open up my heart. And even when I meditate now, without getting too frou-frou-y, I remember that energy. I could just feel it felt like a conduit going down. But for me, that's always been a connection with an animal, and an intuitive understanding of an animal is very natural. And to me, it opens up the natural world and a love of nature. And it's almost my language that helps me connect to that, because actually the natural world is something that I was born in a city. So I actually have to learn the language of nature, yet animals somehow can connect me to that. What's been your, more on to your kind of story, what's been your background with animals and nature? Is that something you've always had a connection with, or is it something that you've created through your expeditions?
I was very fortunate to have a father who was an outdoor recreation teacher and lecturer. He set up a program for Monash Uni in outdoor rec. And so as a kid, I was quite lucky to be pulled out of school sometimes, and I'd go sea kayaking or surfing, cross-country skiing. And I grew up, I think even more important than that, we grew up in a little rural area of West Gippsland on, if you like, a hobby farm. And as a kid, going to school meant getting 2 or 3 different buses. It was an hour journey to get to school and back each day. Now, during that 1 kilometre walk and the 1 hour bus ride each day, over the 6 years of high school, I came to know, I reckon, pretty much every single tree along the road. And I came to know them as characters and individuals, and I'd kind of check in on them each day when I came back. And even though we didn't live next to a national park or anything like that, it was a pretty intensely dairy farmed area. Having those experiences of going down the creek with my 2 brothers and my sister and catching fish, mucking around, it really, I think, infused a passion for nature from an early stage. And I was shocked when I go to Melbourne to my relatives and see these tiny backyards. But having said that, we had dogs, but we never had horses. I'd always associated horses with other types of humans, the ones that were down at the pony club or the ones that were on television in cowboy movies. I'd never associated it with me. And it came as a shock when I arrived in Mongolia and saw these people riding these horses, and something changed. The penny dropped for me that here was this extraordinary relationship between 2 indigenous creatures, if you like, these horses and human beings that have coexisted in that environment of the Eurasian steppe for hundreds of thousands of years. And it's not for nothing, of course, that they say that the relationship between animals and humans has defined much of human history. And to see that symbiosis between a horse and a person in this environment like Mongolia, I wanted to know what that was like. And what I saw in that was the horse being this, what do you call it, the conduit between humans and nature. And so for me, horses, I never knew horses in their artificial environment, in an urban environment or a horse club. I only knew of them as beings that connected people to nature, and that was my attraction to it.
Well, it's really funny that you say that, because back to the equine therapy, I was taken by a girl who was, I never rode as a kid. I just was around some ponies, and just whenever I could get around a horse, I would, but I was never trained to kind of dominate or ride an animal, but she grew up riding. And so she was really excited because she thought, I'm really good with horses and I'm going to equine therapy and this will be amazing. But she had a very confronting experience because the horse wanted nothing to do with her, primarily because she had learned this dominating hierarchy of humans over horse. And she almost had to, her lesson in equine therapy for the first round was almost to sit down and break that. Because that's how we had learned in Western society how we engage with a horse. And it sounds like, from your travels, that's not similar. That's not, it's more of an equal footing.
Yeah. I mean, as you probably know, the history of horsemanship in the West is kind of similar to a lot of our culture and history, which is that the very origins of breaking in a horse goes back to breaking the will of a horse.
Yeah.
Which is linked to a very Christian belief back then that you needed to break the evil in the horse. That whenever the horse misbehaved, as in behaved not according to what humans really wanted, that was the evil in the horse that needed to be beaten out of it, basically. And so European horsemanship became the art of control, whilst the art of horsemanship, even today really, in a place like Mongolia, it's about harnessing the natural energy of that horse, going with it, and choosing with much more carefully when to control and when to be dominating. But the best horses, of course, are the ones that do misbehave because they've got that strong will, and the last thing you want to do is break their will. You want to harness that wonderful, wonderful energy. And I think that goes once again back to our topic before about finding that balance between, taking control, but then also letting go. And I had to kind of deal with that literally on the horses quite often. And there are times in situations where you do have to take control, and you have to be that calm in the storm. You have to be the parent, and rather than the friend, and for their own safety.
There's a lot of lessons there for parenting.
Yeah, I know.
Like I'm just going, oh wow, Tim, you're going to be. If
well,
and when
the
that
children
happens for
break
you, you're
us
going to be
in.
an amazing dad.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking that too, Tim. But yeah, the children break us in, and they're our greatest. I mean, that's why they say kids are your greatest teachers. You don't really understand that till they humble you, and then.
I think that's what I've always struggled with. I've struggled with horses because for me, the concept of breaking a horse, I had in my head the Western idea, and I was like, if you need to break an animal to your will in order for you to have a relationship with it, then you can't trust it. Like that just doesn't strike me as right. That doesn't, and so that's why I always kind of steered clear of kind of horses and always treated them with a bit of caution. I much prefer the idea of working with. Which is, I suppose, the notion of the steps.
I do have a bit of a deep question for you, Tim.
No, here we go. Watch out.
No, it's. I don't know if it's too frou-frou, but I'm curious. Just what have you learned from kind of this alternative experience and partnership with animals? This deeper curiosity and understanding of indigenous culture, and then being in these wild places. What have they taught you, if anything, about our theme today, rushing and slowing down?
Well, a lot. It might be good to roll on to the next little bit of imagery, because
sure thing.
One of the things I learned, and I guess the very heart of Rush Slowly, I learned it in an environment that you might not expect. And this happened when it was winter, and you can see here it was dropping to -40. I was in a place called the Starving Steppe, and things were pretty difficult. I was spending 2 or 3, 4 hours even packing up the horses in the dark of morning. The sun would come up and I'd make it maybe 10 or 15 Ks. But when this photo here was taken, I panicked, and the horse was, as it turned out, getting an abscess. The tent was falling apart. My GPS had frozen. So I just decided to rescue myself and rode to the nearest town, 150 Ks away, and pushed the horses really hard, too hard. We got there exhausted. I'd imagine a nice village with a family welcoming us in, but this is what I came across. It's a mining town called Akba-Kai. I was invited in by a couple of guys, and this is what I opened my eyes to in the morning. This is Grisha and Vitka. And they said, you're going to have a wonderful winter with us, but you might want to, sell the horses before they get eaten and stolen. I went out to look for hay and grain. There was none in this city, this town. I came back. They caught a couple of street pigeons in a trap and brought them up for Christmas dinner. And I made a big error there. I called home on the satellite phone. And my parents were there eating, you might just pause it there for a second. They were eating yesterday's roast and sitting in the sunshine, and I wanted an out from this place. I kind of panicked, and of course, as I later learned, this was only the very beginning of my difficulty in Akba-Kai. I often think of this town, Akba-Kai, as lockdown in Melbourne in some ways. I ended up being stuck there for 3 months, and there were times when I thought that I might never leave. I tried to leave many times in frustration. My petrol stove broke in a snowstorm. I lost all my fuel. I came back. Eventually, Tigan was actually stolen by some mine workers who it turned out were eating dogs to survive, unemployed mine workers, and that led me on this journey where a guy helped find Tigan. A week later, he was rescued from a little shed. You can probably keep playing now if you like. And he was brought back to life with a concoction of raw eggs and vodka. And it was during this period that the local people were getting very frustrated with me. You might just pause it there. They were saying to me, every time you try to rush out of here, you're just causing more trouble for yourself. You're cursing yourself. In our culture, rushing is a sin. And I was now months behind schedule and getting increasingly depressed because this wasn't the type of experience that I had dreamed of. It was more like a nightmare. I thought if I'm going to hunker down somewhere in winter, it'll be in some romantic nomadic village. But eventually I had to kind of take a breath, step back, and suddenly I realised that this was the type of experience that I'd been looking for. It was an experience that forced me to recognise that this was not an environment where you could, even if you wanted to, measure time in dollars and cents and the hours in the day and the Monday to Friday. This was a place that was more about the rise and fall of the sun, the health of your animals, the availability of grass, that kind of thing. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that time doesn't matter. There are situations where moving at the right speed is life and death. If nomads don't move from their one pasture to another, for example, on the cusp of autumn moving into winter, they may get trapped at the wrong time of year in the wrong place. The sheep in a big snowstorm in the wrong environment will gather a huge armoury of ice and they won't survive. They've got to get to those places that are known to be sheltering places in the winter. Anyway, I needed to just take stock, and as they say in Kazakh, if you have to rush in life, rush slowly. And this once again goes back to this whole concept that you don't have to control everything, and a lot of people in life don't have a lot less control than we are perhaps used to in the Western world. And it's not a bad thing to sometimes accept the way things are and concentrate on the things that you can learn from that experience and concentrate on the things that you can control so that you can survive these events that are beyond all of our control in some ways. So we can there's a couple more, another minute or so here. Eventually my time did come, and as you'll see, the snow's melted, and I had my chance to move on, and it left me with this feeling that, life is about sometimes threading that needle of survival and being grateful when you can and move. And sure enough, spring came, as you can see. The greenery came back. People were coming out of hibernation. It was time for the camels to have their spring cuts, and I was able to move on. And that, to me, my journey was broken into two parts, if you like. The 6 or 8 months on the road before Akba-Kai and the journey beyond Akba-Kai, because even though I wanted to break away from time and learn not to rush, it had taken that experience to really force me to understand it and grapple with it and look it in the eye.
It's so interesting because I think we had a similar, I had a similar feeling about the Outback at times when we were there, where my whole intention to doing the Outback, it wasn't to break any records, or no one cared really. You know, we were just weird that we were going off, but was to break this construct that I had to keep achieving, or I had to be a certain place of my life when I had kids or whatever it was. And I really just wanted to do something very unexpected for really no purpose other than existence.
Yeah.
For me, that was very radical. And so the whole point was to go slowly and to be in nature, be disconnected, no phone service out there. We had a sat phone for emergencies, but it wasn't technology really per se. And that was my softness that I was seeking, or that was my challenge that I was seeking, versus when you marry a professional adventurer sitting next to me, he's all about time, like kilometers, because if you're on a trail, we did have a place to go. We had 1,800 kilometers that we were trying to loosely achieve. And I'm not saying this, it was a struggle, because here I was thinking I'm really going to slow down, yet 5 o'clock would come and we had to pack up the cart and we had to get things going and we had to beat the sun because we could only walk during certain times. And then we had a toddler and all these things. I actually felt for the first 6 weeks like I could have been in the middle of the city, because we were rushing. Nothing was beautiful. I didn't want to be out there. And then 6 weeks, something changed and it got easier, and the sun came out and there was beautiful colors, and I enjoyed the red sand, and it was kind of the before and after this tipping point. But I thought that expeditions would give me the space, but ultimately I brought a lot of the same baggage, and Justin and I were fighting around what the point of the expedition was.
Yeah, I mean, we clashed. I mean, something that I've done expedition-wise that's a bit different from you, Tim, is that I've I don't know, I felt like I've always been chasing the clock. And it's a hard habit to break. You know, you've got to get across the Tasman Sea before you run out of food, before the weather comes in, whether it's bad.
And before you die, for good reason.
You've got a finite window. Or down in Antarctica where, you're going to run out of food and you're going to die down there or get rescued. And so I brought that mentality down with me. And so I was obsessing about numbers. And it took me a long time to lose that obsession with numbers, how far we went. And it took a massive argument between the two of us for that to actually happen. But one thing I will note is that first 6 weeks for Lauren, she'd ask me every single day, are you having fun yet? Or are you having fun? And I was just like, well, yes and no. But I am. I'm really enjoying this. But she's like, because if you're having fun, then we have completely definitions of what fun is. And I don't know whether we're doing the right thing. And she said that every single day, basically, until that 6 week period. And then it just kind of hit her, and she kind of got the reason why we're out there and did it. And I'd argue that as the trip went along, she went to strength and I actually fell away into, like, there was this beautiful time where we crossed over, and I was like, we got to the end and she jokingly said, you know, do you want to continue on to Melbourne? But she kind of meant it. And I was like, no, I'm a broken man. I need to finish. So she's infinitely more strong.
Because I had almost lost that control that, we were talking about. It took a breaking.
I think apart from the obvious, what was really interesting in what you said to me is this dance between finding a sustainable way of travelling and living versus, kind of calculate how much food, how much energy you've got, there's the end, and basically get to the end, collapse, kind of return to normal life semi-comatose and then gradually recover. That's the type of mentality I guess I started the journey with.
Yeah.
I was 24 and I'd come off the back of these other adventures where we were fairly regimented. And I had a time plan. I had an 18-month plan all mapped out from Mongolia to Hungary. And it turned into be 3.5 years. But I was immensely frustrated that I was falling behind. But that's the other thing that I found with horses, that apart from my own health, horses really helped me to change that mentality, because quite literally, if you don't look after your horse and don't find a sustainable pace, it'll lose weight, it'll get skinny, and then you go nowhere. And so for me, I had to find that balance, which turned out to be about 3 days on, 2 days off, or 2 days on, 1 day off. Wherever I found good grass, I needed to stop.
Yeah.
And this wasn't the type of journey where I could look to the finish line and think, well, as long as I can survive till then, I'm all right. I had to be thinking 2-3 years maybe. I can imagine between the two of you, there's a different journey going on.
Well, and we had a small horse named Morgan that we had to take care of and keep alive. So I think that humbled us in, like the journey we actually reflect and we're like, that walk would have been quote unquote easy if we didn't have that parenthood element in it. Yet she made us slow down. And ultimately that caused frustration, I think, when you were in that initial mindset. But then it was beautiful when you could drop that. So back to you, Tim, after you left, what's the name of the town? The mining town that was your before and after?
Akba-Kai was called.
Akba-Kai. So when you left Akba-Kai and it was spring and the grass was green and you were meeting these nomadic people that you had deemed kind of the experience you wanted, what changed for you? You said that it was a specific before and after. What was different in the after?
Well, I mean, apart from anything else, I accepted that the journey is going to need to take as long as it needs to, and that's fine. I realised that there was any time goal in terms of reaching the Danube was just an arbitrary time that meant nothing to anyone. There was no one waiting for me at the other end. And so I started to try to sink more in tune with my animals and recognise that I was in it for the long haul. And if there's anything I'd do differently on this journey looking back, and there's not a lot I do differently, but I think the one major thing, if I was to do this journey over, I'd probably spend about 6 months extra on this trip. I feel like I rushed through Mongolia. I would have, if I did it again, I'd probably spend 6 months staying with the family, getting to know them, getting to know the horses better, then set off and being more grounded in the culture. And when you look back, I think, well, what's an extra 6 months? It's meaningless in the context of life, but it would have added so much more. And I try not to forget that, because often when you're trying to commit to a dream or an ambition, you've got to be prepared to go the long haul. And if those really fun bits of that dream end up being longer, well, all the better.
And that's interesting, because it goes back.
Changed the way I related to my horses, to the environment, to everything from that moment on. Yeah.
Well, and that's very aligned with that value that you said in the beginning was, the trip wasn't the 18 months and it wasn't the specifics. It was that kind of human connection and learning from different cultures. So, I mean, that ultimately, spending a tent in the, 6 months in a tent with a family would have achieved that, even though it didn't achieve your original goal of the time period.
Yeah.
What a gift, really, then, to be trapped there for that 3 months, because it broke that Western mentality that there was elements creeping in that, about that time frame, So if you didn't have that, it'd be curious if you didn't have that 3 month experience there, how the rest of the trip would have played out for you, whether you would have got more, would you have eventually learnt that lesson or not?
Well, I reckon had I tried to push on through winter, beyond there, there's every chance that the whole journey could have gone pear-shaped, because the winter ended up being very fierce. It was a long way from that town to the next one, and I fell in with really good people. I mean, Grisha and Vitka, sure, they were very flawed individuals. Their life was tough. Both of them were alcoholics. They'd lost their truck driving licenses, delivering equipment to the mines, and both of them have since died. One of them died of starvation, i.e. drinking alcohol and not eating anything, and the other guy went off into a blizzard one day, as far as I know, and passed away. But I had to appeal to their better side, and they were people with good hearts, and without them I may not be here today.
Yeah.
Partly because they introduced me to another guy called Baidak, and he's the guy who took me in ultimately when I was sick, when the petrol stove broke. He helped me look after the horses. He's the one who rescued Tigan, and this man Baidak became a kind of hero for me. He rescued the journey, and when I left Akba-Kai, they all said to me, "Now Tim, when you go forwards from here, there are no more Baidaks. There are no more men like this. Be really, really careful. You've met one in a million." And I believe that. I could have very easily fallen into the wrong hands in a time of extreme vulnerability. And I was very fortunate most times when I was at my most vulnerable to meet good people and appeal to good people. But you also have to learn when to listen to your instincts and try to ride past people who you don't trust.
That's been a very resonating theme for multiple people we've talked to, which is about, trust your instincts. But at that time when you need something the most, the universe delivers in maybe an unexpected, but nevertheless delivers.
The fate lesson that you were talking about at the start, there's that element of fate that comes in, but always tie up your camel.
Are you still in touch with Baidak?
Unfortunately, the last conversation I had with Baidak was in 2011, and then there was this period of silence, and eventually I contacted his wife, and it turned out he'd had a heart attack and passed away in mid-2011. So, unfortunately, no more. But he was a very special person on this journey for me.
Well, he lives on. I mean, like in these stories and tales that you tell, and the fact that you grace stages around the world now, Tim, in your book, in your documentary, and he lives on. His memory lives on.
Yeah, and he's one of those people, as many others were, who were very understated and kind of in many ways behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And that's why for me, when I finished the journey, I think the measure of it for me was not so much the completion or the distance, it was the connections that I'd made along the way. And all these people, I mean, like Baidak, my goodness, they lived such a tough life. Back then in Akba-Kai, it was as tough as it comes. It was a town that had been left to its own devices after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it was essentially bankrupt. So people were making a living by stealing gold out of the mine shafts, so rappelling themselves hundreds of metres underground, digging it up, paying off the local inspectors and officials to get the gold back out onto the black market, and everyone had their own little backyard lab. If not that, you could also buy tailings from the processing plant that was operating. It was a really tough place where I saw the best and worst. And one other thing we haven't touched on, but has resonated really deeply with me, is that on that journey I never had the luxury to make friends with the people who, conveniently I related to, I liked on the surface, who spoke my language, who understood me. Every single time I had to find a way to create a connection, to understand these people, even when they were completely different, even when there were parts of me that didn't trust them and knew instinctively that these could be dangerous people. And I think that gets lost in the Western world largely because the emphasis here is about being independent. It's about, and I think we often fall into comfort thinking by making friends, close friends at least, with people who we most relate to or share our worldview. And whilst communities traditionally, you have to live with a little bit more tolerance of all walks of life at close quarters.
I think that's really powerful. I know I'm from America originally, and they are struggling, with that, with social media, with politics, with everything that, the comfort thinking, I think, is a big problem right now, because if we can only get along with people like us, we're not going to learn too much about ourselves or others, I don't think.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can I quickly pull on a thread that you started talking about in the middle of that story? And that's that you went through this massive change and you continued the rest of the journey, after Akba-Kai. And when you finished, what did you feel when you finished that trip? Was there a sense of loss? Was there a sense of joy, elation? You'd achieved your goal. You were wondering what next? What was the immediate feeling and then the subsequent feelings that you had after that?
Well, my journey had many endings and many beginnings and so many chapters. So
you're the deepest person I know, Tim.
It was everything. It was a sense of deep loss. I knew that beyond the Danube River, which is the end of the steppe, that was the end of my journey. There was no point taking the horses into a world of fences, a world of cars, and a totally different way of looking at the world. And I missed them greatly, but on the other hand, I was ready to return and visit family and appreciate, cherish time with friends. What I didn't mention, of course, is that the greatest challenge on this journey was one I didn't see coming. No one did, and no one could have prepared us for it, and that was finding out that my dad was killed in a car accident. At the time, I was in Ukraine, and I got this news. I flew home. I spent 4 or 5 months in Australia, and so that last section of the journey through the Carpathians into Hungary was the easiest in many ways, gone with the winters and the summers and the deserts and the thieves and the wolves, but life felt acutely fragile after losing Dad. And to reach the finish line was I felt like I've scraped through. I've survived my first few months without a father, and I was really, really desperate in some ways to get home to Australia and to appreciate, cherish time with friends and family in a way that I could never have understood earlier in my life. Knowing, of course, that leaving my horses behind and Tigan behind at that point would be like leaving family as well, and arriving in a land feeling like a fish out of water, which I did feel as well. So just a whole mix of emotions. And I definitely had the feeling that the moment I stepped off the horse, that was the beginning of the journey in many ways. The journey to write the book, to try and make a film. The book took 4 years to write and the film took 2 years to make. And I'm really proud that I've just finished writing Tim and Tigan, which is my long dream to write a young adult book around all these adventures and themes of resilience and friendship.
We'll get onto Tim and Tigan in 1 second, because the film that you created and the book were, really, really well received. I mean, they've done well on the sort of festival circuits, and grand prize at Banff Mountain Film Festival. The book won that, I believe. So it's that was what, 2013? Did you finish the book? Sorry, I'm trying to remember. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. 2013.
Yeah.
My book had just come out. I toured Australia and I was in the States and Canada with the release there, and I got this extraordinary news that the book had been nominated. It had actually won the Travel Award, and then backstage with all of the other winners, it was announced that mine had taken the grand prize, and that meant a lot to me because writing has been my passion since I was very young. And, it meant a lot that I persevered with not only the story of my adventure, but weaving in the history and stories that all these different people had told me, so that their legacy was in print. And often these nomads and their stories they occupy a little bit of a geographical black spot in our mind in the West. Countries like Kazakhstan, for example. So to be able to tell their story was really special.
We've got both books at home. Actually, I was going to bring them out, but we're in my parents' garage. And that one, there's so much work that has gone into that first book. It's phenomenal. Actually, no, you've written another book, haven't you? Off the Rails. That was another book.
First book was Off the Rails, and then On the Trail of Genghis Khan.
Yeah, On the Trail of Genghis Khan. The amount of work that you put into it, it's a tome of knowledge. It really is. It chronicles your journey and the history, and it's phenomenal.
But that's an ode to that value of connection. You know, you could have just told your story, but you extended beyond that to align with your value of telling the stories of people that might not otherwise be shared. Which is a testament to your alignment, I guess, in how you seek goals.
My poor editor, when he received the first draft of the manuscript, it was 300,000 words long.
Wow. And an average book's about 60, isn't it?
So
an average book is about 60,000, 80,000?
70 to 90.
Yeah.
I'm going to put up. I'm going to just put the front covers of these books up. And Tim, where can people get their hands and eyeballs on these books?
Look, the books are available pretty much every which way online, in store. There's a hardback, there's the audio book, there's the paperbacks, and this goes for On the Trail of Genghis Khan, and also Tim and Tigan, my latest book, which is the idea behind that was to inspire young people to have adventures, to take responsible risks, and to find ways to have the courage to live out their adventures and their dreams. I certainly know that sometimes all it takes is a little tiny 6-month-old pup, to give you that courage to make the leap of faith and go forwards. And if Tigan could do that for me, he could do that for anyone, basically. And I, as a writer and reader, I also wanted to write something that would engage young people to get into reading. At that age, there is not a great deal of non-fiction adventure-type books available, and so that's why I wrote that book. But they're also available on my website, and they do come with a personal signature and a paw stamped. The film these days turned out to be a 3-hour TV series that we made for Arte in Germany and France, and we made then a 3-hour series for the ABC here in Australia, which is now available on demand on iTunes and Amazon Prime and all those kind of. You'll have to look up The Trail of Genghis Khan. You'll be able to download the series from there. Unfortunately, no DVDs anymore.
Yeah, DVDs are a bit of a dead or dying medium, unfortunately.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. We have your book, and I've been wanting to read it with Morgan when she got a little older, and I think she's really into chapter books. She likes to touch them and carry them around, and I think her attention span's getting longer. So I'm really excited to read her Tim and Tigan, and
great,
because you're right, there's not a lot of that genre for kids to help them really find their barriers and push through them, which I think is that important dance that we all have to find for ourselves that we talked about earlier. I've
just covered your face up a bit, but those are the two books in question there, On the Trail and Tim and Tigan. Now, Tim, I have to ask this. I know. Yeah, we're running a little long on time, but I have to ask this question. A couple of people have asked it online, and I know the answer, but a lot of people are asking about Tigan. And I think we couldn't not talk about Tigan at this point. So would you like to tell us sort of, I suppose, what happened with Tigan, sort of the ordeals getting him back to Australia, and then his life since and his progeny, I suppose, that are now scattered around the country?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at the end of the journey, as you probably guess, I was broke, and it was going to cost, as it turned out, $10,000 to get Tigan home. I ended up leaving the horses behind at an orphanage, and they've since set up a riding program for the kids. There was no chance to get the horses back, but with Tigan, there was an opportunity, but it was pretty slim. He was a Kazakh dog. He needed to get a European Union passport before we could even apply for Australian quarantine. So I came home without Tigan and received, after a year, this message from quarantine that I had permission to bring him back. So I was lucky. I was in Perth at the time. I ran a fundraiser, helped out by some sponsors. We booked an auditorium, ran some talks, sold tickets, and people were incredibly supportive to raise the money, to hear the story. And we got him in a plane from, a taxi initially from Budapest to Vienna, then a plane to Dubai, where he had a night in a $500 air-conditioned room. And then he arrived in Australia. And he touched down at Spotswood Quarantine Centre here in Melbourne. And I'll never forget that first moment. He recognised me at once, but then he spied this great big marrowbone that I had brought along as a gift, and he was exclusively fixated on that. He ignored me completely for the next half hour. But that was the beginning of another whole journey. He and I moved up to northeast Victoria in the mountains, and we lived there for 6 years when I wrote the book and made the film. And he travelled many more miles in Australia than he ever did across the steppe. He also had many more children here than he ever did on the steppe. He had at least 3 or 4 litters, and now his puppies are spread around most states and territories. But unfortunately, a couple of years ago, I was in Mongolia about this time of year, and I was just preparing to come back. I now run treks for people in Mongolia, and I've been doing that every year since the journey ended. And I got a message from Mum where I'd left him, and to sadly say that he got himself into one adventure too many and had passed away. So it's been a tough 2 years, and I'm constantly aware of his absence. But I was 2/3 of the way through writing the manuscript about Tim and Tigan, and it injected something extra special, and I think has made that book all the more powerful, at least for me. And that's the chance for his legacy to kind of carry on. I'm also in the process of getting up a documentary about Tigan as well. That will be the way it probably should have always been. He'll be in the front seat, and I'll just be on the periphery.
He was a beautiful dog. I mean, he really was. I met him a couple of times, and it's unbelievable how many rules you were able to break with Tigan and bring him to places where dogs are just not allowed. But he was able to get in everywhere. He's just, yeah, gorgeous animal. And I remember when you had your first litter, he had his first litter, that we were seriously contemplating.
Justin was like, we are getting one of these puppies.
I was dead keen for it. I think it was from memory, I think it was about 2015. There was a litter, I think. And yeah.
And ultimately we didn't, because we live in an apartment, and I was like, it just would be cruel for a free-ranging wild dog.
To see Tim McCartney Snape, he's got one of Tigan's pups. Yeah. And
it's an athlete, isn't he?
Oh, absolute athlete. Seeing that dog bound over fences like they're nothing is, they're just supreme animals. So if people want to get in contact with you, if people want to get your book, if people want to check out your trips, what was your website? Could we talk about that? And I will play the little promo, I suppose, for the book in a second. But what was your website?
Yeah, website is just timcopejourneys.com. I'm sure if you search it out, it'll come up.
Sorry, that's you shouldn't be looking at me though. Oh, here we go. Sorry. There we go. All right. So
timcopejourneys.com. It's an interim website. I'm currently building a new website, and the new website will have everything about the trips that I run, both the scheduled trips that I run through others, and then also the opportunity for people to tailor their own experiences in Mongolia and elsewhere. I mean, at the moment, Mongolia, who knows how many years off that could be, the way that things are with COVID. And people are welcome to look into the book, but also at the moment I'm running a lot of sessions for schools, online sessions, and I'm trying to encourage schools to take up Tim and Tigan, either in upper primary or lower secondary, years 7 to 9. And I've had a lot of great feedback from schools that have taken it on. So if any of you out there would like me to do a presentation for your school, or are interested in having a look at this book as part of your curriculum, then just drop me a line through that website, by email at booktour@timcopejourneys.com, or just jump on Instagram or Facebook.
What a special way for kids who are finding themselves in a very unusual learning experience this year. I know some are thriving and some are not. So that would be such a cool experience to have a bit of adventure infused in what's otherwise a very locked down year, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So thank you for offering that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
If anyone does actually, and everyone who's listening to this actually thinks that should be part of the syllabus, so they should email the Board of Education actually in your different areas. So let's start a groundswell of people harassing people in control to get it on.
And Mongolia is on my wish list for it's the same reason that the Outback was. So it's always been on there. So at some time in our journeys, if it's meant to be, I would love to join you on one of your treks. That would be so amazing.
Tim,
Yeah.
probably going to wrap up by asking you one final question.
Do you want to do a quick?
Sorry. I took Lauren's glory. Lauren does this.
This is going to be a hard one.
She wraps up everyone's conversations. She's a fantastic listener. So, would you like to summarize what Tim's talked about today?
Look, this one's going to be complex because I think I have to digest it because you do have such a beautiful wealth of knowledge, Tim. But a couple things I was taking some quick notes, so I hope you didn't think I was rude. But kind of in summary, I think the things that really stood out to me about this conversation is, discovering that, your world without boundaries was a big kind of driver, whether that's physical boundaries or the boundaries between people, and finding those points of softness and connection are a way that you can kind of bring joy and learning and connection and spark in life. Your journey to live like a nomad and the experiences that have led you to being able to not only survive Melbourne lockdown, but to alter your preconceptions about time and the constructs between the 9 to 5, or how much we should do in a day, or what we should be doing in a week, or what we should be doing in a year, I think is really valuable as all these days blur together. I think you made a really cool thing that to understand a wolf, you have to put on its coat and see through its eyes. I think that's very important on a deeper metaphorical, on the world stage, not only I think to humans, but also to the environment. Our environment is struggling, and if we are wild. I know a lot of us have forgotten it, but there's not out there and inside of us. We are the same. So I think understanding that and putting our lens through nature and animals, I think, is an important thing to remember. Trust in fate, but always tie up your camel. I think that was a good one. Did you tie up your bike camel, Tim, or was that something you forgot when your bike was stolen?
Yeah, that was a glitch.
Okay, well, we'll remember that one. So trust in fate, but always tie up your bike or your camel. The journey towards freedom and really pointing your nose towards the setting sun and not falling into those Western constructs that we force ourselves in. I think that was very interesting, considering we started out our conversation with, the badge of rushing. And you said in your nomadic travels that they see rushing as a sin, or rushing is a curse in your life. So I think it's good to view that there's not, rushing is not only, should not only be a badge of honor, and there's different ways of looking at it. I think be curious, not offended was a beautiful way to explore the world, especially when things don't turn out the way that you had planned. Find that tenuous dance of having a plan, but then letting go of exactly how that plan will unfold or why. But your guiding North Star should always be aligned to your values and what those mean to you. And once you have those, that kind of keeps you centered. But being able to flux in that center, like you thought your journey was going to take, what was it, 18 months? And it took 3.5 years because the journey took a different road than you had thought. And ultimately, that was the valuable part of the journey, I think, is worth reminding ourselves when we like to control our existence to the minute factor. And ultimately, that's not always possible. I think it's a beautiful reminder that dogs and horses and wildlife sometimes choose their human, that we are not the masters of this other world of beautiful souls. Camaraderie for you is really the thing that softened the edges of experience. That's a value that you hold, and finding that alignment. I think it was beautiful when you said, and how you said that, harnessing the natural energy of a horse, not choosing when you can control it, but not break it. The wildness is their power, use it, I think was really gorgeous. And I think that we'll just leave it there for this one. But I think empathy and connection and questioning, we should all question comfort thinking, and try to get outside of what we know to be true, what we know to be our limits, what we know we like, what we know we don't like. And I think we should all add empathy and connection to our own human values, because it seems to have worked for you, Tim. So thank you for sharing that story.
Oh, thank you very much, Lauren. That's amazing.
I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. My
do
brain
that.
doesn't work that way. That's amazing.
Incredible.
But over
Thank
to
you.
you. No, thank you.
Yeah, no, really appreciate it, Tim. Like it's been phenomenal to have this time with you. I know that you are busy, and if it's only because of lockdown that we'll probably be able to capture you, because otherwise you'd be off on an adventure.
You'd be off rushing, but you're forced to be slow. So we caught you in a moment of slowness, which is our fortune. So thank you.
The final question I want to ask, unless there's anything else you want to share, is that we ask every guest, and I've kind of thrown you under the bus here because I haven't given you a warning. We ask every guest that's on the show, who would they like to hear from? Who would you like to see in the hot seat? Who's another adventure thinker that you think has something valuable to share?
Well, that's an interesting one. There's a whole stack of people I'd love to hear from. Some of them are no longer with us. I'd love to be able to go back in time and understand the world as it was seen, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. But in fact, my dream as a kid was to return in time to understand what Australia must have been like pre-colonisation by Europeans. And in a way, I was able to live part of that dream out by going to Mongolia and seeing a place where people were living in a different paradigm to the Western model of thinking. But if there was someone that I'd like to hear from right now, it would probably be, it's not so much an adventurer, but a great author in Canada, a guy called John Valant, who I had the honour of meeting a couple of times. And he wrote an amazing book called The Golden Spruce, which, if you haven't read it, it's a fantastic book. And he's written other things, but that is an absolutely outstanding book.
Okay.
Many more details, but you should all definitely read it.
I've pulled it up. The Golden Spruce: The True Story of Myth, Madness, and Greed. Is that the one?
It's the one.
Wow. Okay. We'll look into that. That sounds phenomenal. And if for whatever reason we manage to get him on, would you like to sort of come in for a little while and ask him a question or two?
Well, we'll see.
Tim, absolutely fantastic. We're gonna just we'll put you off the screen for a second, but just hang on the line for 1 sec, just whilst we talk about you. Thank you so much for being part of the show. It's been phenomenal. It really has.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful to have a chat with you.
Thanks for having me.
Wow. Oh, geez, Lauren. Here we go. Is that... Oh, no. Yeah, there we go.
Where are we looking?
We're looking at that
There.
one. We're looking at that one. We always get this wrong.
I know. He's amazing.
So wise. So wise.
I hope you guys liked that. Let us know if you did. But I think it definitely gave me some food for thought around this time that we are forced to slow down when our society tells us that rushing is, the thing that is deemed successful. So I hope you got something from that conversation. I know I did. And Tim's beautiful videos and photos, you can find him on Instagram. You can find his videos. We will put the links, and then his books are wonderful as well. So I'm excited to actually break into that book with Morgan.
A huge thing that I took from that actually is that, we are all currently on our 3-month winter in Akba-Kai. I'm probably saying that wrong, but that's how, it feels, around the world right now. This is something we're going to emerge from with a different mindset, and we're going to be better for it. So for the people that are struggling, keep your chins up. We're going through a moment of change, a period of change, and we are growing and becoming stronger for it. But if you've got a thought on who else we should have, send us a note. Sorry, you can't really see that because of Lauren's white t-shirt. Sorry, Lauren, I'm not doing anything creepy. adventurethinking.com/live.
Yeah.
Send us a note. We'd love to hear from you. But until next time, thanks so much for watching.